Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we're normally talking about lots of different writing issues, how writing works, how writers work, and how the best writers risk being strange. But today I'm talking with Ryan Fitzpatrick, not about his work, although he has some great work, or about my work, but about The Legend of Zelda. We're both very excited about The Legend of Zelda having a new game coming out,
Yeah, who wouldn't
Tears of the
be?
Kingdom. Who wouldn't it be? Well, I don't know who wouldn't it be, Ryan, because since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with The Legend of Zelda. So Ryan and I were just, we're often kind of texting back and forth about video games and other things. And um, so often, of course, it's The Legend of Zelda, specifically Breath of the Wild, um, which, I really became obsessed with. But right now, I'm actually, not only am I awaiting my Tears of the Kingdom copy, that I pre-ordered, but I'm playing Breath of the Wild some more, and
Like we're
also
we're both doing replays of Breath of the Wild.
yeah,
Like,
well, I'm not really replaying it myself so much as I'm just continuing to play it because my I've got so that game is so huge that even though I beat the game and have spent like 120 hours playing the game on the same save file, I still haven't even explored 30% of the map. Like it's unreal how massive that game is. If people haven't played it, it's a huge game. Um, but also like, I say like I was just a fan of Zelda since I was a kid. I replayed the first Zelda recently. I replayed the third Zelda recently. I'm playing on the some of the Game Boy Zeldas that I missed. You know, recently. I'm in playing Oracle of Seasons right now and Breath of the Wild some more as I'm kind of, and I was doing this before they announced Tears of the Kingdom's a date. So I've just been digging into them off and on all the time. But anyway, we just want to talk about Zelda, but also I think there's something to be said for just sort of the writing and storytelling side of Zelda in my view. So we don't have to maybe dwell on that per se, but I do want to talk about Zelda in a couple ways. And so let me just start though with asking you, Ryan, what do you want to talk about in terms of
um,
Zelda? I know you've got some real
I've got
specific.
a bunch. I thought you've already done some of this, but I thought it would be useful to start just by talking about what our experiences with the games are.
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
because we probably haven't. Because I know I haven't. I've played most of them, but I haven't finished very many of them. But there are some I haven't played, and there's some that I would think are better games or better Zelda games. But
Sure. Well, for me, with of course, I mean, I grew up. My first system was an Atari 2600, and then quickly after that, when I could, I got a Nintendo, an NES, right? And so one of the first games, like many people, one of the first games I ever played was Zelda, Legend of Zelda, and then Legend of Zelda 2, and then when the Super Nintendo came out, I mean the big drive, the push for me to get for my parents to get a Super Nintendo was so that I could play the Legend of Zelda, um, Link to the Past, and then um, really I kind of like fell off playing Zelda games at that point because I never had a Game Boy, so I kind of missed anything they released on Game Boy, and I never, and then I kind of moved out basically, and it was too poor. I didn't have my systems anymore. They had my I we'd actually I'm very much regretting it now. We had like sold them to our aunt for like $30 or something. Me and my brother, and who knows what happened with them after that point. But then like I just didn't have any video game systems for the longest time. I think the next system I had was the PlayStation 2. I jumped to PlayStation because of the Final Fantasy series. And then, uh, I didn't really get into Nintendo again until the Wii came out when I was in Calgary, where I met you. And so when the Wii came out, I was, it was impossible to get a Wii for a little while. I actually ended up importing one from the US and paying like all these massive fees and stuff. But then, I had a Wii. And so because I had the Wii, I missed everything in between the Super Nintendo and the
mm,
Wii. So any so then for that reason, the next Zelda game I played ended up being Twilight Princess when I think remade it for the Wii. I can't remember exactly. Um, and then that game was if for me, I can't remember the details of the release schedule for Zelda, but like it was the first one where you kind of were not top down for me, or the first one they did. I'm not sure, but
It was
it
the
was
first
just
one for you. There were
yeah. I thought there was
three
another one
3D ones
before,
before.
so I missed all those. Yeah, that's right. That's because I missed the GameCube, right?
Yeah.
And then so then I was playing, so I missed all the Zelda games that were on the GameCube. And then I got Twilight Princess, and then I was obsessed with that. I just thought it was amazing. And then but then again, fast forward, I missed everything else until the Nintendo Switch came out,
Mm.
and then Breath of the Wild was re-released on the Nintendo Switch. So that's kind of and it was simply because I didn't have the systems,
Yeah.
and I was playing because again I had my jaunt with the PS2. And then I never had a PS3. Again, I kind of at this point now I've got like all sorts of stuff. Like I've got the Switch, I've got a PS5. I had a PS4 before that, but I quickly like switched it for a PS5, and I've got the Steam Deck. So I've got like more video games than I can deal with these days. But I just ended up missing games because I didn't have the consoles for them. And it's been really great lately. I also bought a Pocket lately. It's like this emulator that you can put Game Boy games in it, like
Mm.
actual cartridges in, and it plays them like it's a Game Boy. Well, it's not technically a Game Boy. So I've been playing, like I say, the Oracle of Seasons. So like I caught up on Nintendo Switch with the port of Link's Adventure, and I caught up I've started catching up a little bit. I started trying to catch up a bit with some of the emulator ones that they've re-released on the
Yeah.
Switch Online thing, Nintendo Online stuff. And then I got this Game Boy to play these games that now, unfortunately, for me, because I spent all this money playing them the special way, but now that they just put them out on the Game Boy Online stuff. But yeah, so I kind of like kept missing ones,
Yeah.
and I didn't really get to see the evolution really cleanly. But so to me, it was like a revelation. Like every time, again, like when Twilight Princess came out, I was like, I totally unprepared for that. And
Because
it
you
just
hadn't
blew me
played
away.
because you hadn't played Ocarina of Time.
Exactly. Like I went from like the third one right to that. And then, you know, again, from that, I went to Breath of the Wild. And which, just, I couldn't, it just floored me. I hadn't played hardly I had not played an open world game.
Yeah.
So never mind, I hadn't played Dark Souls, nothing, so it just blew my mind, and it's still like even now that I've kind of caught up with stuff because I kind of just for varied reasons was kind of in and out of gaming
Yeah.
in the course of my life. But man, I gotta tell you, I'm so excited to be back in it, especially with like actually at one point I was trying to decide between should I buy a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation 4 because I was going to commit to a new video game system. At that
Yeah.
point, I still have my Wii, which I still have. But I was like, I should buy a new video game system. And I was trying to decide between the two. And what decided me on the Switch over the PS4 was Zelda. I was just saying like I think I was talking to you or like what should I buy? And just I think you had said, well, what games do you want to play? And I was like, well, obviously Legend of Zelda. So that just made the decision for me. If I could only buy one console, it'd be the Switch, simply so I could play the new because I had heard there was a new Zelda game out.
Yeah.
I didn't even know anything about it. I just knew, but here's the thing. I literally bought a console to play Breath of the Wild. I didn't even know what Breath of the Wild was.
Yeah.
I just knew it was a Zelda game. So how about you? What's your kind of path?
I think my path is like I was gonna say like, oh, my path is really similar, but I think my path is
Mhm.
maybe a little less spotty. So I've got I was thinking about it and I noticed like on my shelf I've got like 4 NES cartridges that I've held on to. I don't have anything I can play them on. Although I think I have access to all the games anyway. And the 4 games that I've held on to for whatever reasons are Super Mario 1 and 3,
Yeah.
Final Fantasy, the first one, and the Legend of Zelda. And they're all, I think three of them are the copies that I had when I was a kid. I think Zelda I didn't have for whatever reason, and the copy I have is a copy I bought at a garage sale for $5. Um, so there it might not even work. Who knows? But I think those are the games that when I've kind of chased games as an adult, those when I've thought about consoles, those are the games I've kind of chased. Um, and I think Zelda has been the heaviest. Although there was points where I was more interested in Mario. Um, but so I started like you. I played when I had my NES, which was my first console, because my parents wouldn't buy me an Atari because they had heard that if you had an Atari, it would burn images into your TV screen. Um, but they heard somebody convinced them that the NES wasn't going to do that, even though I think if you left the TV on long enough, it probably would. Um, so one of the first games I had was Legend of Zelda, and I was obsessed with it, and I wasn't very good at it. I think I maybe got, I think I found a lot of the dungeons, but I don't think I beat any of the dungeons past like level 4. I don't think I ever found the Master Sword. Um, like I didn't get very far, but it was like that kind of like wandering around looking for stuff and exploring was the thing I was excited for with that.
Let's just
Um,
pause it 1 second
yeah,
here and remind people how hard it was to play video games at that time. Like it was just one, the games were very, very difficult. Like they were designed to take you a long, long time to
yeah,
beat if you ever beat them. Because of course, there just weren't other games. There just weren't that many games. So they wanted, you to buy the next one, but they also wanted you to just not stop playing until they had time to put the next one out.
yeah,
But also it was just so it was one, it was just like the games were harder in many ways than they are this today. But also like you just didn't have resources. Like you could buy a Nintendo Power Magazine or something, or I think they used to back in the day have that phone line you could call.
yeah.
It
I
was
can't
almost like
imagine ever getting away with phoning that phone line. My
no,
parents
I
would
couldn't
be,
either. But
yeah,
but yeah, but that is like how you would get. You couldn't just go online and like Google how to beat where's the next dungeon in Zelda. You would
yeah,
literally have to call Nintendo and ask them, or like find out from a friend, or do what I did. Like, well, in the dungeons, because people don't forget that in Legend of Zelda, like it doesn't like there's no obvious direction or plan for you to go and do anything
yeah,
really. Like you just are kind of exploring. And so like I remember I had to like me and my brother, we had to literally like draw maps. Like every screen would be a square and we'd draw
mm,
like the map and we'd have to like make a map of what was going on because otherwise it was almost impossible to play the game or remember what was where
yeah,
anything was. So just to kind of when you say that like you never got past that these sort of earlier points of the game, I 100%, I think that might be confusing for somebody who's like younger and like playing games now, but that makes perfect sense to me.
yeah. Well, and also like I just wasn't very good, so I think like one of the things that stopped me up in one of the dungeons was the dark nuts, like the knights,
Yeah,
where you had to get behind them. I'm like, there's too many of them and they're too fast. So I think one of the many times in my life where I've like rage quit a game, was
sure.
that game.
You might also
Uh,
have wandered into the dungeon way too early.
yeah, which of course the game is totally okay with you doing. Um, so I played that, and then I never owned a copy of Zelda 2, but I think I remember renting it because, of course, that was the way you played most of your games back in the day. And I remember bouncing off it. I've played it since, and I'm not very good at it, but it's Zelda 2 is very interesting.
Hmm.
We could talk about that later if you want. And then Link to the Past is one I never owned, like the Super Nintendo one. I rented it, and I got a copy later when I was an adult, and I 100%ed it as an adult, and it was like this kind of revelation of how good the game actually was. But I do remember as a kid renting it, and that the opening of Link to the Past was like mind blowing because it was like it's raining and it's moody, and you have to like infiltrate the castle, and it's like it was the opposite of like the opening of the first Zelda game in that it gave you this story direction, and there's only so much you can do in the opening hour of of Link to the Past. It might be one of the best openings of any game ever. Uh, so I played that, and then I kind of I was way more obsessed with Final Fantasy, like Final Fantasy 2, uh, and um, and I went through like a PC phase for a while, so like Doom and stuff like that. And then when I was in university, I just wasn't playing. I think the closest I got was I was working at a video store, and I bought a Nintendo 64 for like dirt cheap from my boss, and I had two games for it. One of them was Ocarina of Time, which of course is, I don't know if it's Zelda 4 or Zelda 5. At a certain point, we stopped paying attention to numbers, and it's you should go back and play that one because I think it holds up. But at that point, it was like mind blowing because it's the first 3D one. So like a lot of the stuff that gets codified in Twilight Princess and get where they really develop it, and like make the dungeons really elaborate, is kind of like sketched out in Ocarina of Time. Um, and then the next one I played, I didn't really play Majora's Mask. I didn't play any of the Game Boy ones until much later. And the next one was like I somehow scrounged up the money to buy a GameCube, and one of the games I bought was The Wind Waker. And The Wind Waker was this kind of like it became my comfort game for a while. I was doing student teaching, and like I would like be exhausted, and I would sit in front of the TV for a half hour a night, just like playing this game where you're sailing as Link on an ocean. And I actually think a lot of the DNA of Breath of the Wild is in The Wind Waker. So I wish they would put that on Switch so you could play that one. And then after that, I was kind of like, I made sure at very least I played all the 3D ones. The Game Boy ones, I think I didn't play the Oracle games until much later, and then never didn't get very far into them. But I did like camp out for a Wii so I could play Twilight Princess. Um, and then I played, and I think I had a DS, so I played the DS ones, which are very bad. Um, and I played Skyward Sword, which is very bad but interesting, as I said in one of my texts to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I
and
was
then like
mentioning.
I had kind of like fallen off Zelda a bit until Breath of the Wild, and Breath of the Wild kind of renewed
And you
my
played on the Wii
interest.
U, right? Like you played it earlier than I did.
Which one?
Breath of the
Breath of the
Wild.
Wild? They came out at the same time.
Oh, did they?
I
Okay.
did play it earlier than you, but they came out on the Wii U and the Switch at the same time. It's the same thing
Okay.
that happened with Twilight Princess. Like I could have played Twilight Princess on the GameCube.
Sure. Interesting. So, I mean, let's kind of maybe dive into a couple specific things
Yeah.
here at this point. Um,
Um,
you mentioned the start of a couple of the Zelda games right there. I think maybe a good place to kind of start is with the kind of openings of some of these games. And so you know, one of my things that I always think about this from a writing perspective, and even just game design.
mm,
So I've got like here in my hand, I bought the little handheld Zelda. This is like Zelda 1 in a little tiny thing. Game and watch they call it for some reason. But if you like start this game, like I'll just here literally, if I start this game, it shows me the first screen. There's like a cave you can walk into. Now, if you don't walk into the cave, you wander up here, you get killed by these guys because you have no weapon.
yep.
If you go left, you get killed by those guys. You go right, you get killed by those guys. You just run around until you die, or you walk into this cave. And what do they do, of course, in this cave? This is one of the more famous openings. There's just a guy with a sword. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. That's it.
Yep.
That's your introduction to the game. And it's so brilliantly economical because it doesn't start you in that cave. It doesn't start you with a guy handing you a sword and saying it's dangerous to go alone, take this. It lets you have the option to go in the cave, which of course you obviously uh, might want to do since it's within the screen you're on. It's the only thing you
Yeah.
can do within
Well,
that screen.
eventually you're gonna go into the cave, even if it's not the first thing you do.
Yeah, even if I mean it's cueing you to go in there as the first thing because there's
Yeah.
nothing else you can do on this screen. But if you decide not to for some reason, you do have the option to not do it, and then you can immediately see the consequence of not doing it. Right? You're at the disadvantage. What are you going to do? I need a weapon to kill these guys. And then here either you die and are returned to that screen, and then you go in the cave,
Yeah.
or you make your way back to it, or whatever. You figure it out at some point. It's so economical. It's such brilliantly simple design, where it's cueing you rather than forcing you to do
Yeah.
something, and it is very simple on one level. Like even just the phrase, "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." Like it's so uh tightly struck, like it's so tightly constructed as a
Yeah.
sentence or two sentences. Um, there's no extra words in there, and it's just gets to the heart of like either what you just experienced, which is that it's dangerous to go around without a sword, or just as a kickoff, hey, here's a sword. Here's why I'm giving it to you.
Yeah.
Right?
There's only
Like
there's only a few games that I name that have like openings. Like I don't know if there's a game that I know of that has an opening so narratively like tight. There are games that I think like
mhm,
do very good jobs of like teaching you how to play them in like the opening moments. Like I think like Super Mario 1 is one.
which is the same
Uh
game designer, by the way.
yeah, I think Doom is another. Like the opening
Yeah.
level of Doom like shows you almost everything you need to know about like how to play that game.
But here's the other great thing about that Zelda opening for me. It's so narratively tight, but at the same time, you don't know what you're supposed to do
Yeah.
outside of like get the sword and then what?
Yeah.
Well, you go, now you got a sword, you can go around and you
Yeah.
have to figure it out. Like you don't know what you're supposed to do in this game.
Yeah.
You just have to literally, and you're never told, by the way. People
Yeah.
forget this because it's so foreign to how we deal with games now, and you have these
Yeah.
opening sequences that are so long and tell you so much story and give you so much to do. Um, there's just literally no explanation ever in this
Yeah.
game of what you're supposed to do, ever. You just have to kind of you gotta you don't even know that you're supposed to go into dungeons and
Until you
like
find one.
until you find one, and then you're like you could find the wrong one, because they're escalating in their difficulty, but they
Yeah.
don't necessarily escalate in terms of how hard it is to get into them. Like some of them you can't open until you get certain objects, but a lot of them you can just stumble into.
Yeah.
It's really to me like it's so fat. I mean, at the time I didn't even think much about it because games were sort of a bit more like that in some respects.
Yeah.
But you just have to learn like a lot of, and the story of the game basically was outside of the game.
It was in the instruction book.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's actually a very good point out. If you had the instruction book, you had that story and you had a
Yeah.
bit more cueing, because these instruction books really used to be instruction booklets. I do a lot of freelance work with a company called Special Reserve Games, which is a division, which is part of Devolver Digital. And one of the things we do, because we make physical editions of certain Devolver games, but one of the things that I'm kind of in charge of in some respects is co-creating these instruction booklets that we do. So it's very important um, for the company that we do instruction booklets. It's like a big collector's kind of item, but also it's like so it's like I'm mostly dealing with the text and some of the design concepts, and so like we did a game recently, a physical only game called Demon Throttle, and it was a real discussion with the developers about like how to handle the instruction booklet because they really wanted it to be like that, like an old school instruction booklet. It's like
Mm.
you get information from the instruction booklet that you might not actually get in the game, and we hit a code in the instruction booklet with, that you can only reveal with heat sensitive ink and all this cool stuff. But like that used to be those instruction booklets are rarely made anymore,
Yeah.
one at all. And when they are made, they just don't necessarily have the same function they used to have,
Yeah.
where because so much of that has been, for good reasons, so much of that has been taken over by like wikis and things like that. But it's a very different approach to storytelling in these old games, especially in a game like Zelda. And as you say, by the time you jump ahead to something like Zelda 3, and that opening is completely different.
Yeah.
But it is a brilliant opening in its
Well, and
own
it's
way.
economical in a different way, I think. Like
Hmm.
it kind of it directs you a lot. And I don't think it's better or worse than the Zelda 1 opening.
No,
Um,
I mean, my favorite Zelda game is the third one.
yeah. Well,
Um,
me too.
yeah, and so that's my favorite game of all time. Never mind my favorite Zelda game. But one of the things that's so great about it, as you say, is that opening sequence. It's very engrossing. It's very immersive. It has a moodiness, an atmosphere to it that at least I don't remember being as common in games or as well done at the time. I mean, maybe I'm just it's my memories, but
I think that generation, that Super Nintendo, because I was thinking about it like at some point last year, I was replaying. I think I replayed the first 20 hours of Final Fantasy 2,
no,
or
which
Final Fantasy 4. But that game like has so many cutscenes in the first 20 minutes, and it's like, oh, this is where this was invented. Like there's a little bit of that in the NES Final Fantasy and then the Dragon Quest games, but like it's like cinematic at that point. And
now are
that
you
opening of the
talking?
Zelda game is
I always get confused with the Final Fantasy series. Are you
yeah,
talking about the SNES game they
the
put out?
SNES game, yeah.
Okay, so that game is one of the fascinating things about that game, which if people may not recall, is one of the selling points of that game at the time. Now it's not we're talking about Zelda, we're talking about Final Fantasy quickly, but as a
Yeah.
detour. But one of the selling points of that game at the time was they actually the Super Nintendo should not be able to run that game. It's actually designed in such a way that it has like higher resolution graphics than can be played on the Super Nintendo. But they nevertheless like somehow figured it like modded it in the cart or something so that it actually works. I forget the tech details, so
Mm,
someone can correct me on it. But I remember at the time it being like there's some aspect of the game where it's like it was a 32-bit game in
mm,
certain respects being played on a 16-bit system. Either the music or the graphics had been modded in some particular strange manner. So again, maybe my memory is faulty, but it was something weird like that. Like the capability of the machine at the time was, and the games they were designing in that period were just amazing, particularly for the period. And Zelda, again, for me, it was as much as I loved that Final Fantasy game, like it didn't beat Zelda to me,
yeah.
you know.
Um, well, let's move back to Zelda, and like instead of talking about like good openings, maybe
Yeah,
we should talk
let's talk about
about one of
Skyward
these Zelda
Sword.
games that has a bad opening.
Yeah, so
Um, well,
so
I was gonna say we should talk about Twilight Princess because you've played that. Because I
well, I
think the
want
openings of Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess are really similar in their problems, but like
so I can't
Twilight
remember the
Princess is
opening
a
of
bit,
Twilight Princess very well. So,
yeah,
the only reason I know the opening of Twilight Skyward Sword well
yeah,
is that I played. I missed that Skyward Sword originally when it
yeah,
came out. And when I missed it, and I came back to it later. I mean, the reason I came back to Skyward Sword later is because they re-released it.
mm,
Um, and I bought it, of course, excited for a new Nintendo Switch Zelda game. I know it was an old game, but it was new to me, right? And they had just kind of everything remastered it and everything. Anyway, I put an hour into that game. I played the game for an hour, and after an hour, I still did not have a sword. And I
yeah,
remember distinctly, like it was such to me, like again, think back to like Zelda 1, right? It
yeah,
was like literally the first thing you do is a guy hands you a sword. He says, "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this sword." That's the narrative tightness of it and how quickly you get a sword.
yeah,
Compared to me, Skyward Sword was just an absolute nightmare. It was
yeah.
the opposite of what I loved in Zelda, and I just quit playing the game. Now I hear that there's good things about that game later on, um, but I wouldn't know because it took me an hour to get a sword, and I was like, "This isn't a Zelda game."
No, like that was what I was like, because both of those games, like somewhere in between Zelda 1 and Skyward Sword, Nintendo slowly um learns or thinks that suddenly it can't trust its audience. Like its games have gotten too complex. Um, so it needs to like at the off the top tutorialize like for 3 or 4 hours. before it gets to like the meat of the gameplay. And then Twilight Princess is a bit easier to stomach. I think the opening of that game is a bit more charming. Like I kind of like herding the goats in. The catching the fish for the cat is kind of like silly, but like it was kind of entertaining. But you're right. Like the opening of Skyward Sword is you spend a lot of time talking to people
Well,
and not getting to the meat of the action.
and it's not even that I love, so to me, this is where Breath of the Wild really hit it
Yeah.
right. Because again, even though it's this open world, it's this 3D approach, um, you just are dropped into it.
Yeah.
You're literally like just dropped in. You literally wake up in this world. You don't know what's happening. It becomes part of the story that you don't know where you are, what's going on, and it's
Yeah.
different. And all this stuff has happened in the meantime since you've been asleep, you know. But you're just dropped in, and like you got to figure it out. And you can. I mean, it's such an open world game that, and it's like the first game. There's a level of directionlessness to it.
Yeah.
At a so you can, if you want, uh, just literally go to the final boss and fight him. And if I don't know who can manage to do that, but people do it. People
Well,
speed run that game and just
you can. I think this. What's the speed run? What's the world record
it's
at?
like a handful of minutes. I forget. It's less than half an hour if
It's
I'm
under half an hour for sure.
yeah. To again, because all they're doing is they're waking up, going to the final boss, killing him. And it's like I don't know. I mean, I'm not good enough to do. I'm not very good at playing video games, but you know, but I do remember even on Breath of the Wild, like I was kind of following the storyline for a while, but then at a certain point, I just stopped doing that and started doing side quests. And
Yeah.
I think I was texting with you at the time. Like you were like telling me all these things that, you're like, oh, have you done this? Have you done this yet? And I'm like, Ryan, I've literally just been doing side quests for weeks. I have not advanced the story for weeks, because I knew what I had to do. I just was like, well, before I go there, I'll just do side quests. But there was no end to the side quests.
Yeah.
And it was just, I was so having so much fun and there all the side quests in Breath of the Wild they just have a good amount of narration, like a
Yeah.
narrative. Like there's just enough narrative that you kind of know what you're supposed to do, but also it's interesting to follow the story a little bit. But then it's done. It's like a bunch of little shorts, flash fictions or short stories. And some of them are
Yeah.
longer, some of them are shorter, but you can just get your narrative fixed without really advancing the storyline.
Well, this is something like I wanted to ask you about because it often seems to me like there's and I think this is true of a lot of video games, but I think um Zelda's a good example to think about with this because some of the games handle it in one way and others in another, and it's the idea that like there's almost two narratives going on at any given point. There's the kind of overarching story that the game wants you to take away, which is the story of like Ganon has taken over the land and Princess Zelda has whatever, she's been kidnapped, she's in psychic battle, like whichever game it is. And then there's the minute to minute story of the gameplay. I think like with Mario like games, this is more striking because like you don't need like the princess being captured as an excuse because the narrative that game is run to the right.
Yeah.
Like it's the things you're doing as you're getting there. And I think Zelda does that as well. So I wanted to ask how you feel about that. Like,
Yeah. Well, like you say, it's a different so it's handled differently in different games. Now, we should note that there are a couple of exceptions to it, but for the most part, I think you're right to point this out.
yeah,
For the most part, Zelda tells the exact same story every game, down to like who the boss is,
yeah.
and like you got to get the Triforce or whatever standing for the Triforce there is. It's like there's eight things or
You gotta
there's
get him
three
you gotta get a
things or whatever.
MacGuffin. Yeah,
Yeah, and you got to do these dungeons, and all the dungeons are kind of like these little clockwork puzzles, as well as kind of having some action to it. And then at the end of all that, you end up fighting Ganon, and you got to get a certain arrow. Like it's really precise. There's like a couple things you basically do in every game. Now there's
yeah.
exceptions to that. Like you got games like Link's Awakening where it's not really what you're doing.
Well, and Majora's
Um,
Mask is the classic example of that because that's a game I bounced off of 3 or 4 times because I like I
some people tell me it's their favorite of the Zelda games.
and I really I feel that I'm glad someone likes that game because that game is like if we think about narrative in those games, like it's really interesting because that game's all about assembling narratives because you live the same 3 days over and over. So there are all these side quests where you're running around this town and figuring out people's daily routines and like you solve problems for them. At the same time, you're trying to like stop the moon from crashing into the earth, which is the overarching story of the game, right? Um, which and that I think that has a different kind of narrative stakes than like literally any other Zelda game.
Well, so let's just jump back to your question though, which is,
Yeah,
um, yeah, how did the games handle differently or balance these sorts of? I mean, I think of it as the main quest versus the side quests,
yeah,
right? Which is kind of a pretty, as those side quests again, they're it's not unique to Zelda. Like a lot of the quote unquote RPGs have this structure where you got a
yeah,
main quest, and then at a certain point in the game, you're allowed to depart from the main quest and do side quests.
yeah,
Final Fantasy almost always has a structure where you have to follow the main quest for a certain period of time, and then you get these breaks where you can do side quests or
mm,
not, right? And then some of these more open world games that have come about in recent decade uh, or so, they tend to take that to more extreme level where you
yeah.
can again, like I was playing, I was really obsessed with Horizon Zero Dawn for a little
Mm,
while there, and it was one of those things where it's like you're basically following main quest, then you get out of this, you kind of get past a certain point, and then you can just roll around the world and do
yeah,
side quests, and you don't have to advance the story, just like in Breath of the Wild and so on, right? And so like I think one of the things that I like about that structuring and the way you can kind of bounce from one to the other, and I find in Zelda it's a bit more extreme. Like I feel like you can more quickly get into side quests in Zelda than you can often. Like there's less compulsion for the most part in those games to advance the main narrative,
yeah,
and there's less requirements to advance the main narrative often as well. Like you can just skip things. Like you can skip items in Zelda. You can just not get certain items. It's not like Metroid or something where you have to do this to unlock this. You know what I mean? Like there's some of that in Zelda, but there's a lot of like just things you could just not get.
yeah,
And you know, uh, and there's a lot of like your ability to kind of just go on these side quests or completely ignore the side quests. Is really extreme. I feel in Zelda compared to a lot of similar games. What have always liked about it personally is it kind of becomes two games in one for me. And in fact,
okay,
in Zelda 1, you literally like it was the first. I mean, the other thing that blew my mind about the first Zelda was when you beat it, it just you unlock a whole second game.
yeah,
Like they just modded it, and it's fundamentally totally different. And you get like eight. It's like it blew my mind. Like I couldn't believe how big the game was to start with, and then like you literally have a whole new second game for me. What? And like I don't feel like I haven't seen that again per se, but it has like that ability. I feel like the side quest uh side of it kind of like it lets you preserve the exploratory thing where you're just kind of
yeah,
looking around the world and just checking things out, uh, like you did in the first Zelda.
yeah,
Um, but also, you get the opportunity to have these to really go through a story if you want to follow these main quests. Like
yeah,
I've always liked the kind of bopping between them because if I ever get bored of like Zelda, I'll just switch what thing I'm doing. So like to me, it makes it more like it's technically the same game and it's technically the same gameplay, but I think it has because it has the narrative quality is so
yeah,
different. It feels like you're kind of switching from this game to another game, even though you're still playing the same game. So to me, it
yeah,
has always kept it fresh for me. Like I whenever I get bored of it, Zelda, I just keep playing Zelda, but I just do it in a different way.
yeah. I think this. Um, this is one of the reasons why I find like Skyward Sword so interesting, so easy to hate, and so interesting to talk about. One of the complaints that I've seen people have online about Breath of the Wild is that it doesn't really have any dungeons, which isn't entirely true. The shrines are like mini
It's not,
dungeons and
but
the
it
beasts,
is. It
but
is
there are
also
no,
my complaint.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it doesn't
and
have a lot
part
of
of the
classic
reason,
Zelda dungeons,
part of the
except for the
reason,
beasts.
yeah, part of,
Yeah,
I think people who have that complaint need to go and play Skyward Sword again. Because if Breath of the Wild is kind of the Oops No Dungeons edition of The Legend of Zelda, Skyward Sword is the Oops All Dungeons um, uh, edition, where Skyward Sword, for all that kind of hand-holdy tutorialization, uh, what I think the central and all the kind of like experimentation with motion controls, the central thing that Skyward Sword wants to do, because it's just as interested in breaking the Zelda formula as Breath of the Wild is. Because the thing it wants to do is it wants to turn everything into a dungeon. So the overworld is a dungeon that you have to solve. It's like a giant spatial puzzle. And then the dungeon. So it's like you have to, in order to get to the dungeon in each of the areas, you have to go through a whole dungeon. Um, so it's incredibly dense and thick. Um, and like it's exhausting because of that. Um, and I think like for me, one of the reasons why Breath of the Wild was so good is it restored the thing that I liked so much about the Wind Waker. Where the Wind Waker is the first Zelda game since Zelda 1 to feel kind of open, where you can go in any direction. It's really empty, which is another complaint about Breath of the Wild, because you're just sailing to these islands. You find them, and the island will have something neat you can do, or it'll have like a serious story thing that you have to do. Um, and I think like that kind of overworld exploration, it's weird because it's like the two things that Zelda does are like the dungeon and the kind of exploratory overworld. Well, one is like a clockwork puzzle, and the one is like the overworld. And I think Zelda should have both, but it's I think people have a different idea of like how much of each they actually want in a Zelda
well,
game.
I often think like it's interesting for you to frame it that way, where like the overworld and that Skyward Sword becomes a dungeon in a manner, in a manner of speaking, because there's two things that are kind of interesting to me in that. So one thing I would say, not knowing that game well, but one thing I would say that I always think about with the first Zelda and how I just go back to the side quests
Yeah.
and side of it. Since the first game, I think Zelda has been very invested in secrets. There
Mm.
are secrets in this game, and the side quests are in some ways are just an extended form of secrets.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a level of which you don't need to figure out the secrets, but the game is sort of promising that there's secrets if you want to figure them out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I remember, what I realized with Zelda 1 when I was playing it originally, at a certain point, me and my brother were kind of playing it. And what we realized at one point was basically, with maybe a handful of exceptions, basically every screen of that game has a secret on it.
Mm.
So and again, this is almost every single screen. There's a rock you can push, there's a place you can blow up a rock to unveil a staircase, there's a thing you can burn down, like a tree you can burn to unveil a staircase or something. Like there's basically more or less a secret on every screen.
Yeah.
And so what I realized, once I realized that, of course, it became like a question like, okay, well, let's just go screen by screen and figure out what the secret is. And the way that Zelda 1 works is like if you have the uh like certain items that will only work once on the screen and then you have to leave the screen and come back,
Yeah.
and so like I remember like I would literally like if there's like 20 trees, I would go on the screen, burn the tree, go back, come back, burn another tree, like until you get the candle where you can burn multiple times on the screen. Like I would just go do that, and like eventually it would unlock a a staircase, and then it becomes a question of okay, well, what's down the staircase? And it could be you get some money, they take money from you, you know what I mean? Like, or
It could be a dungeon. I think one of the
it could be a
dungeons is you
dungeon,
burn a random tree.
yeah. So like but it's one of those things where it's like really there's maybe 10 secrets you have to uncover to advance
Yeah,
the game, but there's like 200 secrets
yeah,
in that respect. And then when we get into like uh by the time you're up to like Link to the Past, it's there's some of that still,
yeah,
right? But there's also like some of those kind of secrets have really graduated narratively to becoming these side quests,
yeah,
where you kind of like, you have this little mini story that you could completely avoid or you could follow along. And then eventually, as you kind of and Breath of the Wild, I think by the time you get to Breath of the Wild, like all those elements have started to advance. But you're not required to do a lot of it. Like it is like but again, like I beat the game Breath of the Wild, and I beat the game. I played it for 120 hours and did a ton of stuff. Got like
yeah,
most of the shrines. I still haven't been to 30% of the map.
yeah,
And as you say, there's no need to in some ways
yeah,
because again, some people complain about this, but it's like you just don't need to go. There's like nothing there for like most of the map. There just isn't anything. But
yeah,
if you still just kind of have to go check it out to see.
yeah,
And there's sometimes weird surprises, and like I'm always startled by how on one hand there's nothing, but on the other hand there's like some little hidden thing,
yeah,
if you just go to any part of the map.
yeah. I'm amazed because like I know you said like your current playing of Breath of the Wild is you're just kind of going back to your save file. I decided to start fresh. I set a bunch of rules for myself so the play experience would be different. But hearing you talk about like you're having that realization about Zelda 1 where it's like every screen has a secret. It's like that moment where you begin to kind of see behind the curtain a little bit. You're like, oh, here's how these game systems work, and it begins to it changes how you engage with the game. And I'm finding that in my playthrough of like my new playthrough of Breath of the Wild, where I made all these decisions. It was like, okay, I'm gonna get all the shrines this time. Um, I'm going to like play as many shrines as I can before I do the 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 beasts. And I'm gonna do the beasts in this specific order. Partly it's partly reverse the order that I did the first time I played the game, and partly because like I refuse to do the camel anything other than last. Because the game world escalates as soon as you start beating them, right? You get the annoying Yiga guys who start showing up way more often.
Sure.
Um, so like it's interesting that like I've totally changed my playstyle based on the fact that like I learned all this stuff about how the game mechanics work. Whereas the first playthrough, I was like, "Oh my god, I don't know what. There's 100 bats in a swarm. What's that off in the distance? Is that a fucking dragon?" Like it
Yeah,
was way
right.
more about like finding things and being surprised, and it's
Yeah,
interesting how yeah,
I feel like I'm still in that moment, like because like the other day. So what I've been doing lately, like I say, I've just gone back. I haven't played the game for a year or so now,
yeah,
but I went back to it just to kind of, I always think about going back to it and playing more, and then I kind of went back to it to sort of think, okay, well, what am I going to do next, kind of thing. And what I've just been doing is there's this, in the version I've got, I think I've got some DLC or something where you can
yeah,
press a button and you can see like where you've been on the map. It's like the last 100 hours or something of where you've been on the map. So it's not
yeah,
necessarily everything. It's like mostly what you've been doing. And it literally draws a line on the map of where you've been. And so I'll just turn that on and I'll go to a place I haven't been or I haven't been in the last 100 hours in any case. And then I'll just go check out what's over there.
yeah,
And it's always startling to me what's over there. Like it'll be like endless nothing, and then all of a sudden, like something either large or small or weird or interesting. Like the other day, I was just kind of kicking around in some area, and I found like this weird little. It's almost like a little island, but all it is like a little circular ring with a pool, and
Okay.
inside the pool is a treasure chest.
Mm,
And there's nothing really in the treasure chest, but the reason it's there is that it's going to draw lightning to it, and then when the lightning comes, it like kills everything in the pool.
mm,
And so, you know, and I don't know if there's something else going on or some other thing I'm supposed to do with this chest. But it's just like it's such an interesting little tidbit like
yeah.
of the world, like things like that are always it's just very interesting to me, and one of the great things about that game in particular is the way it just has these kind of rules of like this thing interacts with this thing, and
Yeah.
so you can just like almost figure out how to do certain things based on that. Like if it's raining, well then this is the true. If it if it's not rain, if it's if you got metal during a lightning strike, you have to take your sword off, you have to take your shield off, or it's
Yeah.
going to start lightning you. But then maybe you want to throw your sword into a pool, then it'll kill the fish in the pool. You can collect the fish. Like there's all sorts of weird and interesting like aspects of that. Like so, or like if you're hunting in a cold region and you just leave the if you just leave the meat before you pick it up, it'll freeze. And then
Mm,
that's a different kind of meat now.
yeah.
Like I found like that kind of part that those aspects of the game where the interactivity of the environment with other aspects in the environment. I forget the technical term for it, but it's a really inventive approach.
Yeah.
And it's something that at least for me, is new in a Zelda game in that
Yeah.
particular game. But I can see like where it kind of harkens back to that whole, there's a secret on every screen kind of
Yeah.
ethos.
Well, and it breaks the kind of lock and key logic of it's about like this interactivity rather than like a kind of lock and key like way of designing the game, which is very much like what the old school dungeons would be.
Yeah, and at the same time, again, that's something I love about these games that you would have these moments. The dungeons actually are almost a third type of game inside the game, as
Yeah.
actually, I never really thought about it too much, but there's a way in which the dungeons are kind of their own little games,
Yeah.
and they're very much constructed in this kind of clockwork manner where you really are solving puzzles to advance.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say I was gonna say like if anybody's listening to this and they're really interested in like the dungeon design and the kind of lock and key thing, there's a really great YouTube series by this YouTube creator Game Maker's Toolkit. And he did a whole series like about like the different Zelda games and the way the dungeons change and get more or less linear and the different types of dungeons there are. He also has a really great series on Metroidvanias too, and the like, and because those are also a kind of lock and key game.
yeah, but it's a good way to put it. Like in Zelda, you almost get in the Zelda series, depending on the game, but
Yeah,
broadly speaking, you almost get like the best parts of a Metroidvania in those dungeons.
yeah,
Like they almost become Metroidvanias inside the dungeons in some many respects. Like
yeah,
they're little encapsulated, and often, at least traditionally, in the older Zelda games, they would design in each of those dungeons. You would get a new item,
mm,
and then that dungeon would be constructed around the abilities that you gained by getting the item.
yeah,
And so there was a real again, it almost is a quality that started to become associated more with Metroid and Castlevania than
yeah.
Zelda per se. But in some ways, it really starts in Zelda. That
Well,
it seems to me, at least, maybe I'm missing something, but
the problem with the Zelda, the way the Zelda does it, and it becomes really apparent in a game like Twilight Princess, where the items that you pick up in the dungeon are so specialized that they're really interesting in the dungeon that you find them in because the dungeon is built around puzzles using that item and then completely useless afterward. I'm thinking of like there's the spinner disc in the desert dungeon.
hmm, yeah, yeah,
There's the rod that lets you control statues, and the dungeon that you're in like has lots of those statues, and you have to lead a statue through the dungeon, and then you never use it again, really, outside of that dungeon.
Sure, yeah.
Whereas in a Metroidvania, like,
Yeah, the whole game changes.
yeah,
hmm And you start to unlock new areas entirely, which again, it technically is something that you do see in Zelda, like in Zelda Link to the Past, you see that more. Like it has
yeah,
more of that Metroidvania structure where you get this glove, you can pick up this rock, and now you can go to this area.
yeah,
Right? Like so it has those kind of Metroidvania elements, even though it's not a 2D platformer.
yeah,
But uh, it is you're right. It is something that kind of becomes more a hallmark of the dungeons themselves than anything else.
yeah.
By the time you get into the later 3D games,
And I think that's a problem of like in the later 3D games, they have to surprise you with the items. They can't just like, because it gets predictable. Oh, this is the dungeon where I get the bow and arrow. This is the dungeon where I get the hook shot. And so you keep encountering the same kinds of puzzles because there's only so much they can do with a hook shot.
yeah, sure. And then also, but you also have the other problem where one my complaint about Breath of the Wild, I have two big complaints, which is one, I wish there were more clockwork style dungeons in it. Again, like I don't necessarily I liked being able to stumble across some of them that you
Mm,
didn't have to do. Like I remember I forget all of a sudden, but there's one where it's like a labyrinth, but you don't have to actually ever play it. I thought that was just a highlight of the game for me.
mm,
Um, but and I wish there was more stuff like that. Maybe there is, and I just haven't found it yet, though.
yeah,
So it's maybe a premature complaint, but as a common complaint, But my biggest complaint about the game is, again, otherwise, Breath of the Wild is probably one of my top 5 games of all time. So this is a mod to say I've got these big complaints. But I really dislike the fact that the Master Sword is not a good weapon. It's like the only value of the Master Sword is that it doesn't is that it you know I mean it's not even a power traditionally that would be it's so hard to get it, and then it's the most powerful item in the game.
yeah,
Or maybe there's some one other sword you can get that's better or something, but like there's basically like it's the most powerful or the second most powerful weapon in the game typically, and it has like all these this typically is there's some new ability to unlock with it or something as well. But in Zelda Breath of the Wild, it's literally like it's got like it's not a terrible sword. It's like I think does 30 damage, but I mean a lot of things will do twice that.
yeah,
And then it doesn't break, but it'll just kind of become inactive. It goes down to like it might as well have broken because you can't do damage with it anymore. For until it kind of charges back up. So it's like I barely use like the fact that I work so hard to get it,
yeah,
and then I barely even you want to use it. To me, is like a real weakness of that game, particularly when historically in Zelda the sword was so tied to the story,
yeah,
and it's so disconnected from the story in Breath of the Wild that you don't even have to get it.
yeah.
I don't believe so. Maybe I'm incorrect, but I don't believe you actually have to get it to beat the game because I
No,
don't
you
think
don't.
people can because people go beat the game without even going to get it. So yeah, 'cause you can't get it unless you have so many hearts, right? So then a lot of
Yeah,
people will just beat the whole game without even going near it, which is fine as far as it is. It's on some ways a good thing about the game, but the fact that I chose to go get it and then did all the things I had to do to get it,
yeah,
and then I don't even want to use it after that point.
yeah.
It to me is a real that's like the biggest complaint I have about the
No, I can see that. And that's really like a narrative complaint.
game.
Like
Yes,
I think it would have been interesting if it's one of those things where they have to have the Master Sword in the game because it's a Zelda game. I
right.
think the game would actually be more interesting if it didn't have the Master Sword. Or if it was
Well,
so hard to get that or if it was game breaking but like extremely hard to get.
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Or even if they just had a better explanation as to why it sucks. But
Yeah,
you're right. It sort of felt obligatory that it's in the game, and then also, but if it's going to be in the game, it might as well. It should be game breaking or something like
yeah.
that. It just should have some other something going on
Yeah.
with it. It just
Like
seems like they kind of you get it and then whatever. You
I
got it.
think like because the only thing that it's really useful for Guardian like things.
Is it? I mean,
Well, because it
the
doubles it,
arrows are better for that.
but like because I feel like this is getting too in the
You're
weeds.
right.
But you fire an arrow into its eye and then you use the Master Sword because the Master Sword doubles in strength against the Guardians.
It's
Like it's
true, but at the
60
same
instead of 30.
time,
Um, Everyone stopped listening as soon as they
I
heard
know,
me
right?
like,
Well, let me ask the fundamental question, I think, because given that this is a game series
yeah,
where the games are very different, I
yeah,
mean, they have certain similarities, but fundamentally, like, game to game, they're often quite different by this point. And given that there's ones that we just don't even like, and aspects of ones we do like that we dislike, why is it that we're so obsessed with Legend of Zelda? Have you ever really thought to yourself, like, why am I so obsessed with this game? Like,
yeah. I don't even like
because
half of them.
I didn't even
Um,
like half of them, and like I literally bought a console to play Zelda,
yeah,
and I hadn't played it for like since the Wii came out.
yeah,
Um, and really, if you look closely, I had only played 4 Zelda games in my life
yeah,
prior to the Switch Breath of the Wild, and I didn't even like the second one very
yeah.
much. So why am I obsessed with Legend of Zelda?
I think there's probably a like for me at least, there's a few reasons. One is it's one of the few long running series where you can see the people designing the game actually taking risks. Like it's not like a cookie cutter thing. Like there are games that are kind of more cookie cutter than others, but like it's a game where you can see the designers making big swings. Um I think like the other game series really um is Mario that does that really consistently. I think we could probably imagine other ones, but like when I look at like the game series that everyone seems to be obsessed with over the last decade, which is Dark Souls or the From Software games, those games all like are iterating like on a very specific thing, and so like there's like I, I'm probably gonna draw ire for dismissing them like that because even though I think they're very
Well, I
interesting.
don't think that's dismissive per se, but it
Um,
is true though, right?
yeah,
Like and that's as you say how most of these games work. Most games,
yeah,
people forget what a game is. What a
yeah,
game is that there is a game mechanic,
yeah,
right? Uh, that is the game.
yeah,
And then you can have all this narrative, you can not have narrative, you can have all this other stuff, but
yeah,
like the fundamental of what the game is a mechanic.
yeah,
And so it makes sense for a successful game series to iterate on the mechanic because there is a level at which, if you look at a series like Zelda or Super Mario,
yeah,
although those characters are the same, the game is actually not the same game.
yeah,
Like Super Mario 1 and Super Mario, like, what's the one I was playing the other day? Bowser's Fury. Like, they are not the same game.
yeah. They have some shared mechanics,
Not
and they have
really.
and there's like an
There's a
iterative
handful.
history.
There's
Yeah,
like you jump on things. Like that's
yeah,
basically the shared mechanic. And there's a narrative history and there's a continuity in a manner of speaking.
yeah,
But but actually there really isn't that much continuity, even story wise. Like Zelda will just literally tell the same story again and again and
yeah,
barely even attempt to tie it together.
yeah,
Once in a while they'll tie the story together, but for the most part, it's like Marvel comics.
yeah,
there is no consistencies to
yeah,
that story anymore. And it's interesting though, as you say, it's more normal and more sensible for a
yeah,
game to just do iterations on its core mechanics, like Dark Souls
yeah,
and From Soft's games do, like Metroid in many ways does, and so on. I mean, that's what I mean. Yeah, why when you depart from the game mechanics so extremely that you know, from like Link to the Past all the way to jump to Breath of the Wild. Like
yeah,
it's literally not the same game on many technical
yeah.
levels, although we
I
call them both Zelda.
Yeah. But this is the other side of it, because I think for folks, like, there's something fundamental about like whatever the first Zelda game you play that you're looking for another hit of it. And if they give you the hit in the exact same way, you're not going to get it. I know for me, it's like, it's the kind of roaming exploration of Zelda 1. It's the kind of clockworks of Link to the Past. It's the feeling of like hitting an impasse that I first felt like in a way I enjoyed in Ocarina of Time with the water dungeon that everyone hated but secretly loves. Um, and it's like the feeling of like boundlessness that I got from like
Mm.
Wind Waker and that I get again from Breath of the Wild. So there's like there's different kind of feelings that are attached to like certain of those game mechanics. And I think like and Zelda mixes enough of them in interesting ways that I think that for me that's where the obsession is.
Maybe this is a good comparison in some ways to maybe there's a way in which FromSoft's and games and the Zelda series are linked in that it is, I mean, Zelda, I think this is true also of FromSoft's Souls-like games, which is that in Zelda, like there's a level at which because of the risks and because of like, there being like a handful of things I just really loved
Yeah.
about each of these different games. There's just this level at which, for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, like I trust that they will make a good game.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe I'm wrong or disappointed from time to time at certain aspects of it, or even just in whole games. But for the most part, like I trust that they're just not trying to churn out another one,
Yeah.
you know? Like I like it really I mean when I've been really upset with Zelda, like I really hated Cadence of Hyrule. But
I
it's
never
actually
played that.
not a Zelda game. Like it's
Yeah.
one there's a couple of like Zeldas where they've kind of skinned the character into this other game. And those have always been very disappointing to me. Um and partly it's because I just didn't trust them the way I trust Nintendo to deliver me a good Zelda game,
Yeah.
like, and maybe they're going to delay it for 80 years and maybe they're going to build it and then throw it away and never tell me. But like, there's a fundamental level at which I trust Nintendo to at least deliver on Mario and Zelda.
Yeah.
I don't know how far I can trust Nintendo, but I believe in that they have the best interests of Zelda and Mario at heart,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. It's weird, like it's a weird thing to say, but I think it's very similar in some ways to like I'm not a big I'm not really big into the Souls games simply because I haven't had time to really dig into them
Yeah.
seriously. They seem like they're tailor made for me, except for the difficulty leveling.
That's where I'm at too. Like I love
But
watching other people play them.
I'm
Elden
kind of
Ring looks
obsessed with
like
them.
Elden Ring looks like if that game ever goes on sale, I'll probably try it and then play like 3 hours and then go, I just
I
can't.
own them all, Ryan, and I've played maybe 1 hour total of all of them combined. And I've got like, but I bought multiple like hardcover collector's editions books about them and things.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of obsessed with them, even though I've barely played them. But people who are more players than I am, what I hear all the time is the same sort of enthusiasm that I have for Zelda for some of the same reasons. Like there's a level at which they just fundamentally trust FromSoft to deliver them not only another great game, but one
Yeah.
that's better than the one before, as opposed to one that's worse, which
Yeah.
is so often what you get in series,
Yeah.
right? There's exceptions, of course, but like for the most part, what you get in a franchise is like another one that isn't quite as good as the one that came before. Whereas
Yeah.
like maybe, I mean, to me, it's hard. Again, I still feel like Zelda 3 is the best game for me but I still, but I feel like they keep trying to beat it,
Yeah.
which I don't think you can always say uh, for creative teams necessarily at that corporate level. Like
Yeah.
maybe individual artists or small indie teams kind of have that goal, but at the corporate level where you're dealing with a massive franchise, rarely do they take those risks so consistently as you're pointing out we see in the Zelda franchise.
Yeah.
I'm not always a big fan, but like I admire that approach in many respects. Maybe I'm romanticizing it all
I mean,
based
it's
on just having grown up with, and it was like a game that first impressed me when I was a kid, and so I just nostalgically magnetized to it. But there's just, I mean, I feel like that's less the case than it might be otherwise, for the simple reason that there isn't as strong a storyline to gravitate towards. Like the story of Zelda is very simple and
yeah.
alchemical, um, to the point where there's really not much you can do with the story, and so they have to keep departing from it. So I
Yeah.
feel like for that reason, I just feel like I'm not as attached to it nostalgically as I might be attached to like stories from my childhood. I never really thought of Zelda as having a great story or one that really resonated with me in any particular way.
Well, it's the minute to minute story of your actual gameplay, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's what you're attached to. It's that time that you figured out whatever puzzle or like for me it's like with Zelda 1 it's like my memory of the map. Like the map is burned into my memory, crowding out, things that might actually be useful to me.
Yeah, right. Man, and the music too, I just have running on a loop in my head 24/7, I
Yeah.
swear. And like
Both songs from Zelda 1.
yeah, both of the two. Yeah. But it's anyway, let me ask you what you're kind of hoping from Tears from the Kingdom. I haven't really paid too much attention to it, I gotta admit. I know there's not a lot of information about it.
Well, they've released like next to nothing. I think they know that like the game is good. I think they know that they don't have to tell anybody anything about it because they've
Yeah.
released like 3 or 4 trailers, two of which like give no information. This one that they recently released like has that had the most stuff in it. So
Hmm.
so what I'm hoping for, so number one, I'm hoping to be surprised. Which is my number one worry is like I won't because they're using the same map. Um,
Yeah,
and like
I believe they're adding a level in the sky to it, it seems like. I don't
and
know
I
if
think
that's true, but
a level underground.
that's what it seems like. I mean,
Yeah,
again, we're speculating here at this point in time.
yeah.
When you're listening to this, you might know better than us, if you're in the future. But
If you're in the
uh,
future and it's
that
May
is
and
what it
you've already
seems
played it.
like, right?
Um,
But I mean, that's fine by me. I'm happy with that.
yeah,
I trust them to, even if they're going to literally reuse the same map, I trust them to like tweak it
yeah,
or like layer in some stuff I haven't found yet, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, I believe that they're adding these kind of two levels of it. But
yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
So I'm worried that because they're using the same map that like a lot of it will feel old hat. Although like literally I'm playing through Breath of the Wild for the second time and having a great time playing it. So it couldn't hurt to play through Breath of the Wild third time, even if it's like really similar. Um, I'm worried that, or I'm hoping that there is some like dungeon activity, although maybe I'm like less hung up on that than like other people are. I don't need them to be like the second coming um of like the dungeons from Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess or anything like that. I'm not expecting that. I don't even necessarily want that. Um, but I would like something, like
Is it the
some more density.
is it the camel beast that where you're turning it around? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that was the level that the most to me felt like an old school Zelda dungeon. And it
yeah,
was to the point where I got started to get very frustrated with
Yeah.
it. I believe I looked it
It's that
up at
it's
one
that water
point.
dungeon feeling where it's like I don't understand. I'm doing things, but I don't understand why it's not progressing because the puzzle isn't like a room to room whatever. The puzzle
Mhm.
is like you have to solve this huge thing.
I loved it and I thought it was brilliant, but I think I also like I'm the kind of guy who at a certain point I'll just go look it up
Yeah,
because I just am not as invested in I got other things to do in my life,
yeah,
but like I kind of wanted I just wanted I just felt like okay, you're proving to me you can do this. Just give me a little bit more of it.
yeah.
And then make it
Yeah,
optional where I don't have to do it per se.
uh, yeah,
So I'm kind of hope that's my kind of hope. It's like I kind of want a bit more dungeon action, but I also kind of would like maybe like one of the things I like about the shrines in the Breath of the Wild is, some of them you just fight a monster and you're done. Other
yeah,
ones you got a little bit of a puzzle. It's small, or sometimes they're larger.
yeah,
But I like how I'm not always forced to do the big puzzles. Like if I'm really having a hard time
yeah.
with the puzzle, I can come back to it later. I'm not forced to do it to progress per se. But you know, what do you think of the speculation that a lot of people have based on the last trailer that they
Yeah.
put out? A lot of people are speculating because of like one of the lines in there that you're going to end up at some point being able to control Zelda as a playable character. Now, I don't know if that's a reasonable thing for people to expect based on this trailer. I'm not sure that I 100%. I kind of see what they're basing that speculation on, but I don't 100% understand why they think that based on the trailer. Like I kind of 80%
Like
understand it.
it's
But what do you think
100%.
about that idea?
It's 100% copium. But like it's not going to happen.
I
That's
can't
my.
imagine it would,
But I the only way I
but
could see them
I
doing it without kind of breaking the narrative DNA of Breath of the Wild is if at the beginning of the game you get to choose, and then you have to play the whole game as either Link or Zelda. But otherwise,
I can't
there'd have to
imagine
be
that though.
otherwise to like switch. You would have to either be able to actively switch, or there'd have to be some narrative linearity to the game.
Yeah, or at least for that section or something, right?
Yeah,
I know people. I mean, the other thing that is interesting with Zelda is the side of the idea of Link as a silent
yeah,
character, for the like I forget who it was, but someone on Twitter, I think it was Sam Sykes maybe, somebody was making a joke about this at one point, where it's like, imagine a man, he comes to your town, he doesn't say anything, he just smashes your pots. you know, he never speaks, and like just the psychotic nature of like this person who's, the hero,
yeah,
uh, being kind of just none unspeakingly doing all these things
yeah,
as he like stares at you. It's a funny idea, but at the same time, there's this level at which it it really has become a hallmark of the games, like that
yeah.
Link never responds. Although, if I remember right, didn't they have? Wasn't there a moment in Skyward Sword where he does speak? I can't remember
No, I
100%.
don't think so.
Yeah, I feel like there was
I think there's
something.
moments throughout the games where it's like the implication is that he said something, but you never
Yeah,
hear what he says.
yeah, it was something like that. I remember distinctly something, but it was not like the normal. But then the way Zelda normally works is you literally like walk up to a guy, you press the button as if you were going to speak to him, and then he just says something to you. You don't, and he carries on a one-sided conversation. Like they tell
Yeah,
you something, and then you go away and do it or whatever.
yeah,
So I always thought that was it's a hallmark of the game. It's this very curious aspect of it. I mean, I
yeah,
know that I've heard a lot of people surmising that this is a way that the player is able to insert themselves or attach themselves to the character. They're not saying something that you wouldn't say. I don't know how much credence I give that idea myself, but I've always have thought was an interesting aspect of the games that it's something you don't really notice until you start to think about it,
yeah.
but it is something that really has become part of the game on a fundamental level.
Well, and Well, the other thing connected to that is the weirdness of like in every other Zelda game, you name Link. Like Link
Yeah.
isn't the like Link is only the character's name like in kind of like a general way. You can name the character anything you want, but because of the voice acting in Breath of the Wild, Link is Link. Like there
Hmm.
is no, and at that point you might as well have him speak because the idea of him not speaking is supposed to be, oh, so it's so like the player can put themselves in Link's shoes.
Mm. Yeah, I don't, I mean, I've never 100% understood that argument that it's so that you can put yourself in his shoes, though. I know people always say that, but I've always felt like, well, is it really the case that we don't put ourselves in the shoes of a character who
Yeah,
speaks? Or even just like, is there a level at which we feel like we're in his shoes? I mean, we're controlling him, so
yeah,
isn't that enough? I always have kind of felt that was the case, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong because on the other hand, I've got much more of an attachment to Link than I do to other characters.
yeah.
You know,
Well, and I think to like have a connection to like a character who speaks and has and is a character, like
yeah,
you
there's
would
no
have to like
interiority to Link,
you would
which
have
is
to
interesting.
you would have to like actually role play as them, or like
Sure.
they would have to be similar to you. Like, but I found myself in some like open world games like like I remember playing The Witcher 3 and thinking like going through these like romance storylines. I'm not exactly a very romantic person, but here I am like role playing as Geralt Geralt the Witcher, the super horn dog, because that's what I think the character
Yeah,
is
yeah,
doing.
sure. No, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought it was an interesting aspect of Link that you don't have again like it's a weird series in that you have these rich worlds that are awash in these little mini stories and this large story, and then you're going through this epic, save the world story. But really, at the same time, like the story is simple.
Yeah,
It's often a retread of the earlier game story, even when the gameplay is not a retread.
yeah,
And then you have this character who is effectively devoid of all dimensions,
yeah.
and has no character interiority. Like, does Link make jokes? Like,
No, he just
what is he
stares
even? He just
dumbly like it.
stares silently, and like all he does is and he doesn't even necessarily like we don't even know if he's brave. We don't know his if he has a motivation. He just is sort of
I
moving
mean,
forward.
he's only brave. He's only brave if the player is brave.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I just I find it such a fascinating series in so many ways, but I think in some ways what almost explains its popularity to me and its durability to me is the way that it just doesn't participate in things of the moment.
Yeah,
Like it just sort of is doing what it does. And like, in a period, for example, when we have these open world games that are very invested in, telling a story that has a complex character making difficult choices. We instead now we get an open world game where the character has no interiority. We don't know why he's there or what he's doing.
yeah.
He just happens to be moving forward for no apparent reason, but he could also just stop moving forward. Like
That
it's
might be the only like thinking narratively. That might be the reason why Breath of the Wild, why Zelda is was the series that was able to like break the kind of like the formal concerns of like the Ubisoft style map game, right? Like Assassin's Creed or
sure.
whatever, where you have this huge map that you use hardly any of, because the character has to go on a specific journey from one place to another. Whereas Link is told like, well, eventually you'll have to go beat Ganon, but until then, until you're strong, you feel strong enough to go do it. Here's your buffet table of possibilities, right? And the only
Hmm.
game that I've seen that's done that, um, and arguably from what I've seen, maybe done it better, is Elden Ring, where you're playing another kind of like player defined, kind of faceless character. Um, you're given a rough task that's not very clearly explained to you, but like really your goal is to go out and like um sample the world and do stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas when you play like a specific character in Horizon Zero Dawn or The Witcher, like there's a there's a narrative path that the designers want you to go on.
Yeah, there's a propulsion to it. Even though you can depart from that path,
Yeah,
um, there still is. It just feels like there's a bit more propulsion narratively because your character is defined as the kind of person who is going to go on this quest. And
yeah,
and in a way, like when I played Horizon Zero Dawn and I'm not doing the main quest, I'm always aware that I'm not doing the main quest and that this character would do the main quest.
yeah,
If I was being honest,
yeah,
she would continue forward and, do these things.
yeah. Whereas
Whereas Link,
Zelda, it's like, yeah,
yeah,
why not go
what does Link
bowling in the
want?
mountains?
Yeah, why not? It's interesting. Well, uh, this has been really interesting. I'm really curious to chat with you again about Zelda when we've gotten a chance to play Tears of the Kingdom, and
Yeah.
really have either allayed our fears or gained new fears.
Hey,
Um,
I'll be happy as long as because looking at that last trailer, it seemed like there was a lot of like building vehicles. I'll be happy if I don't have to build a pickup truck to
yeah.
go haul things across the map. If that doesn't happen, I'll be happy.
I'll be happy if I get a sword within the first hour, like
You'll have a
before an
sword within
hour
the
is up.
first minute.
If I have a sword in the first minute, I will be happy. I don't care what else happens. That hour, I swear to God, like that's one of the few hours in my life that I think about what if I had that hour back?
I
you know,
I think you need to muscle through the first third of that game
I
and
do
then abandon
plan
it.
to, but I don't know. I just feel like I'd be better off playing Elden Ring,
No, you would be better off playing Elden Ring.
you
You'd
know?
understand why Elden Ring and why Breath of the Wild are so good by playing like a shitty game like Skyward Sword.
Have you played Elden Ring really? You
No,
say
I've watched multiple playthroughs. Um,
See, this is
I'm
the thing.
worried.
I'm so obsessed
I don't
about
want
it.
to spend $80 on a game that I might stop playing within an hour.
See, I bought the game and now so I've spent $80 on a game I've only played for an hour.
Yeah,
But I'm still like I got to get back to it. It's hard for me to invest the amount of time.
yeah,
I say that, but at the same time, I've spent 120 hours playing Breath of the Wild
yeah,
after I already beat the damn thing. So I know that that's not true. I just for some reason I've just got this mental block. I think the difficulty of it, or at least the belief that I have that it would be too difficult for me. I don't know if
yeah.
there are these games really as hard as people say, or are they just you're convinced of that before you start playing them, and it's a reverse placebo effect where
Mm.
you get less healthy as a result of thinking you're going to do poorly in this world. I'm not sure, but
Well, maybe after we play Tears of the Kingdom, we could come back and try Elden Ring.
I think that's a great plan. Let's stick to that um, particular plan. Well, thanks for talking to me about Zelda, Ryan, and we'll talk more about Zelda in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I would say keep writing the wrong way, but maybe
Keep
keep
playing the wrong
playing
way.
keep playing the wrong way.